Sarah Matthews stood at the edge of the lake, her hand skimming the water's surface. The light ripples danced around her fingers like the thoughts swirling in her mind. She was thinking of Mark, her fiancé, and their upcoming wedding. They'd been together for 3 years, and she still remembered the night he proposed under a canopy of stars. It was the most romantic night of her life, and even now, the memory warmed her heart. Sarah worked as a marketing executive at a mid-sized firm, nothing flashy, just enough to keep her stimulated while allowing her to pursue her other passions. Her family, on the other hand, was prominent in the business world. Her father, Robert Matthews, had founded Matthews Enterprises, a thriving conglomerate. Despite her family's considerable influence, Sarah had always preferred a life a little out of the spotlight. She wanted love, genuine connection, and a future built on trust and honesty. That's what she thought she had with Mark. Mark was ambitious, driven, and charming. As a rising star in the finance industry, he'd earned the respect of his peers and was well on his way to making a name for himself. Sarah admired that about him. His tenacity and focus were 2 qualities she believed would help them build a secure, successful life together. They shared big dreams, or so she thought, and had even talked about starting a family in a few years. Life seemed perfect. Then there was Emily, Sarah's best friend since college. They were inseparable, and Sarah couldn't imagine a life without Emily by her side. They had shared so many firsts together. First jobs, first heartbreaks, first tastes of freedom. Emily was vivacious, full of life, and always seemed to have just the right advice for Sarah. In fact, she was one of the first people Sarah had told when Mark proposed, and Emily had squealed in delight, promising to be the best maid of honor ever. In just a few months, Sarah would be walking down the aisle. Surrounded by friends and family, her heart set on the man she loved. She couldn't think of anything that could ruin her happiness. But life had a way of surprising you. The night that would change everything started innocently enough. Mark had told her he was working late at the office, as he often did in his line of work. Sarah decided to spend the evening with Emily instead. They went out for dinner, laughed, and caught up on each other's lives, just like old times. Emily seemed a little distant that night, distracted almost, but Sarah shrugged it off, thinking maybe her friend was just tired. After dinner, Sarah decided to surprise Mark at his office. She'd bring him his favorite coffee and maybe some dessert, thinking he could use a little break. She parked her car outside his building and headed up, her heels clicking on the polished marble floor as she approached his office door. But as she drew closer, she heard voices. Her heart started to pound. She recognized Mark's voice, but there was someone else with him, a woman. She hesitated, wanting to believe it was just a colleague. Maybe they were discussing work late into the night. It wasn't unheard of. But then she heard laughter. Emily's laughter. The sound was unmistakable. Sarah froze, her heart hammering against her chest. She pressed her hand to the door, the laughter inside turning into murmurs, whispers. Her mind raced, trying to reason with itself. It didn't make sense. Emily was her best friend, and Mark was her fiancé. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. She couldn't stop herself from opening the door. The sight that greeted her made her stomach drop. Mark and Emily were standing close, too close. Emily's hand was on Mark's shoulder, her body leaned into his in a way that was unmistakable. Sarah's voice, barely more than a whisper, broke the silence. "Mark?" Both of them turned, their faces painted with shock and guilt. Sarah's heart felt like it shattered into a million pieces as she looked between them, her mind struggling to process what her eyes were seeing. There was a long, painful silence as Sarah stared at them, disbelief and hurt swirling in her eyes. Mark tried to speak, but no words could justify what she was seeing. Emily took a step back, her face flushed with guilt. Sarah felt her knees buckle, the weight of betrayal crashing down on her. How could you?" Sarah's voice trembled, her hands shaking as she clutched her bag. She felt vulnerable, exposed, like her heart had been torn open for the world to see. "You were supposed to be my best friend, Emily, and Mark, you were my everything." Mark opened his mouth, struggling to find words that could somehow undo what he'd done. "Sarah, please. I can explain." Sarah shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "Explain what, Mark? How you thought it was okay to betray me with my best friend? Or how you both lied to me, made a fool out of me?" Emily, looking down at her feet, murmured, "Sarah, It wasn't supposed to happen like this. We didn't mean for it to go this far." Sarah's voice turned cold. "And yet, here we are." Without another word, she turned and walked away, the sound of her heels echoing in the empty corridor. She didn't know where she was going. All she knew was that she couldn't stay. The life she'd envisioned, the love she thought she had, it had all come crashing down in a single gut-wrenching moment. In the days that followed, Sarah plunged into a deep state of grief. She felt numb, unable to comprehend how two of the people she trusted most could hurt her in such a way. She'd spent so many years building her life around Mark, sharing dreams and plans, only for it all to come undone with a single act of betrayal. Her family, especially her father, rallied around her, offering support in any way they could. Robert Matthews wasn't just her father, he was her rock. As the head of Matthews Enterprises, he was well respected, known for his fairness and loyalty. He had always instilled those values in Sarah, teaching her that trust was something you earned, not something you took lightly. And yet, she'd trusted the wrong people. In time, she started to regain her strength. She spent more time with her family, especially in her father's office, learning about the family business. She immersed herself in work, finding solace in the daily tasks and responsibilities. Her father, noticing her dedication, suggested she take on a formal role in the company, which she accepted with a hesitant but determined heart. As she settled into her new life, Sarah found herself becoming more involved in the business. She was determined to move forward, to heal, to build a life where she wouldn't be defined by the betrayal she'd experienced. She was ready to embrace a new chapter. Little did she know, that chapter would bring Jason, a man whose presence would challenge everything she thought she knew about herself, about love, and about what it meant to truly move on. Months passed since the breakup, and Sarah felt like she was finally moving forward, leaving Mark and Emily behind as she refocused on herself and her career. Meanwhile, Mark found himself grappling with an uncomfortable reality. Initially, he hadn't fully grasped the consequences of his actions. He'd assumed Sarah would eventually forgive him. She was kind-hearted, understanding, always willing to see the best in people. But she'd vanished from his life with a finality that shook him. For a while, he convinced himself he didn't need her. His ambition was his true focus, and Sarah had been just another step toward building the life he envisioned, a life of power, wealth, and influence. But as he started to pursue a highly lucrative deal, one that had the potential to secure his future in the industry, he stumbled upon a surprising fact. The company he was aiming to partner with, Willow & Co., was closely affiliated with Matthews Enterprises, Sarah's family business. The revelation hit him like a cold splash of water. The family he'd dismissed was one of the most influential forces in the very world he was trying to break into. And Sarah's father, Robert Matthews, held considerable sway in the industry. Suddenly, his mind turned to Sarah, no longer as the fiancée he'd betrayed, but as a connection he needed to win back for his career. A plan started to form. If he could get Sarah back, maybe he could regain access to her family's network. It was a shallow, desperate calculation, but he convinced himself it was the right move. He could have her back, build the future he wanted, and even feel a tinge of satisfaction at mending what had been broken. After all, he'd be doing them both a favor, wouldn't he? Mark reached out to Sarah under the pretense of clearing the air. He sent her a message, then another, until she reluctantly agreed to meet. They met in a quiet, upscale coffee shop. Sarah arrived with an air of composure that unsettled him. There was a new strength about her, a poise that hadn't been there before. "Sarah," Mark began, his voice soft and apologetic, "I know I hurt you. I made the biggest mistake of my life, and I want to make things right." Sarah folded her hands on the table, her expression calm but guarded. "Mark, there's nothing left to fix between us. You made your choices." He nodded, feigning remorse. "I know, but I'm a changed man, Sarah. Losing you made me realize just how much I took for granted. I miss us." Her lips tightened, but she said nothing. She simply waited, allowing him to speak without reacting to his words, and it unnerved him. He shifted in his seat, then reached across the table for her hand, a gesture they once shared so naturally. But Sarah pulled her hand back, giving him a pointed look. "Mark, I appreciate your apology. I do. But we're over. I don't want to go backward." His face faltered briefly, and she could see his frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "But—" He quickly masked it, forcing a sad smile. "If that's what you really want," he said, injecting a hint of regret into his tone. "But if you ever change your mind, I'll be here." Sarah offered a polite smile, then excused herself, leaving Mark to sit alone with his failed attempt. He clenched his fists, frustration gnawing at him. This wasn't going as planned. He needed her back, whether she loved him or not. Not one to give up easily, Mark decided to take another approach. He learned that Sarah had taken on a more active role in her father's business, and used this as an opportunity to angle himself as a helpful guide. One day, he casually showed up at Matthew's Enterprises, surprising her with his presence. She raised an eyebrow, wary but intrigued by his persistence. "Sarah," he said, his voice slick with charm, "I heard about your role in the family business. I thought I'd stop by to offer some advice. I know a thing or two about climbing the corporate ladder." Her expression was unreadable, but she didn't stop him. He took it as a sign of interest and continued, trying to position himself as an ally. He talked about industry insights, partnerships he thought could benefit Matthew's Enterprises, and even hinted at his own lucrative connections. It was a subtle dance, an attempt to make himself look valuable without outright stating his intentions. But Sarah saw through it all. She'd learned a lot since the night of their betrayal. She understood the game he was playing, and she knew he was here more for his own benefit than hers. "Mark," she interrupted, her tone polite but firm, "I appreciate the gesture, but I have all the support I need. Besides, I'm perfectly capable of handling things on my own." He faltered, clearly not expecting her confident response. She smiled, tilting her head slightly, her gaze unwavering. "I wish you all the best with your own career, though. Truly." Her words were a dismissal, and he felt it in every syllable. She was telling him in no uncertain terms that he had no place in her life, personally or professionally. With a tight-lipped smile, he excused himself, feeling the sting of rejection once again. Desperation gnawed at Mark as his ambitions began to crumble. His dealings with Willow & Co. had stalled, and he knew that without the Matthews' goodwill, his chances were slim. He could feel his grip slipping, his future crumbling before him. In a last-ditch effort, he decided to lay it all out, hoping that honesty, or at least a version of it, would sway her. He went to her home one evening unannounced. Sarah opened the door, surprised and visibly unamused by his appearance. "Mark, what are you doing here?" He took a deep breath, letting the desperation seep into his voice. "Sarah, please, just hear me out. I know I've made mistakes, and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you." She crossed her arms, her gaze unwavering. Why, Mark? Why do you need me now? I want to be better. I want to build something real, something meaningful. I lost sight of that, and losing you showed me just how empty my life is without you. Sarah's expression softened for a brief moment, but then she shook her head. You don't need me, Mark. You need someone to fulfill your ambitions, and you thought I was your key. But I'm not here to be used. His face fell, all pretense of charm dropping as he realized the truth. She saw through every word he'd said, understood every angle he was trying to play. There was no winning her back, no redemption to be found in empty promises. I loved you, Mark, she said quietly. But that love is gone now. You made your choices and I'm making mine. As Mark walked away for the final time, Sarah felt a wave of closure wash over her. She hadn't just ended things with him. She'd reclaimed her sense of self, her independence, and her worth. No longer would she allow herself to be manipulated by someone who saw her as a stepping stone to success. Her eyes were open now, fully attuned to the value she held beyond any relationship. In the days that followed, she poured her energy into her work, strengthening her resolve to build a future that was truly her own. She'd learned valuable lessons from Mark's deceit, lessons in trust, self-respect, and the power of her own independence. She was no longer a passive player in someone else's game. She was the architect of her own destiny. As she moved forward, her life became richer, fuller. She connected with new people, found mentors who genuinely cared for her growth, and gained confidence in her role at Matthews Enterprises. She no longer felt the weight of her past. Instead, she saw a future filled with possibility. And in that future, she met Jason, a man who would challenge her, inspire her, and ultimately become her true equal. But that, she realized with a hopeful smile, was a new chapter entirely. Sarah's work at Matthews Enterprises became a lifeline, a place where she could channel her energy and rebuild her confidence. Her father, always her steady support, watched with pride as she blossomed into her role. He'd initially been hesitant to push her into the business, but now he marveled at her natural talent and instinct for problem-solving. She had an eye for strategy, a keen intuition that gave her an edge, especially when it came to expanding the company's influence. One day, Robert called her into his office, an uncharacteristic gleam in his eye. Sarah, he began, I want you to spearhead a new partnership initiative with a tech company. It's ambitious, but I think you're ready. She nodded, feeling both excitement and nerves prickling her skin. This project was significant. Matthews Enterprises had been slowly evolving its focus toward technology, and this partnership could catapult them into a new era of innovation. Yet her excitement was tempered when she saw the name on the project brief: Kingston Dynamics. The company's CEO was Jason Kingston, her father's most formidable competitor. Kingston Dynamics was young, agile, and aggressive in its expansion, rivaling her father's influence at nearly every turn. Jason had a reputation for being shrewd, efficient, and relentless, a businessman who pursued his goals with single-minded intensity. Jason Kingston, Sarah muttered, feeling a flicker of challenge rise within her. Yes, her father replied, watching her carefully. I believe you're more than capable of handling him. And remember, Sarah, this project will give you the experience you need to stand on your own. Don't underestimate him, but don't let him intimidate you either. She nodded, her resolve hardening. This was her chance to prove herself, not just to her father, but to herself as well. She would step into this new world with her head held high, prepared to meet any challenge. A few days later, Sarah found herself in a sleek, modern conference room at Kingston Dynamics headquarters, waiting for Jason to arrive. She glanced around, taking in the minimalist decor and glass walls. It was clear that Kingston Dynamics was a company focused on the future. The door opened, and Jason Kingston walked in, exuding confidence. Tall, with sharp features and piercing blue eyes, he had an aura of intensity that filled the room. He wore a well-tailored suit and carried himself with an ease that suggested both self-assurance and authority. Sarah couldn't help but feel a flicker of tension as their eyes met. "Ms. Matthews," he greeted her with a firm handshake, his gaze steady. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you." "Likewise, Mr. Kingston," she replied, matching his firm grip. She refused to be intimidated, despite the subtle air of challenge in his voice. They took their seats, and Sarah wasted no time diving into the proposal. She presented Matthews Enterprises' vision for the partnership, outlining a collaborative approach that highlighted mutual growth and expansion. Jason listened intently, his expression unreadable as he occasionally nodded. When she finished, he leaned back, his gaze assessing. "Impressive presentation, Ms. Matthews. But tell me, what makes you think Matthews Enterprises can keep up with Kingston dynamics?" Sarah felt a spark of determination flare within her. She knew this was his way of testing her, but she wasn't about to back down. "With all due respect, Mr. Kingston, Matthews Enterprises has been a leader in its field for decades. While Kingston dynamics may be quick and innovative, longevity and experience have their advantages. I'm confident that together we can create something truly groundbreaking." A slight smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth, a hint of approval in his eyes. "Fair enough, but don't think I'll go easy on you. If we move forward, I expect nothing less than excellence." "Then we're on the same page," she replied coolly, meeting his gaze with unwavering confidence. Their first meeting set the tone for the weeks that followed. They met regularly, each session a mixture of collaboration and subtle competition. Sarah found herself both challenged and invigorated by Jason's approach. He wasn't just another businessman. He was a force to be reckoned with, someone who pushed her to think sharper, work harder, and aspire higher. As they continued to work together, their conversations began to stray from purely business matters. Jason was intelligent and driven, but he also had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard at times. Sarah found herself enjoying their interactions more than she'd anticipated, laughing at his sarcastic remarks and banter. One evening, after a particularly long meeting, they ended up discussing their lives outside of work. Sarah mentioned her love for painting, a hobby she'd rarely had time for lately, and he shared his passion for hiking and photography. "Most people wouldn't peg you as a nature lover," she teased, picturing him in a corporate suit even on a mountain trail. He laughed, a surprisingly warm sound. "Well, I'm full of surprises. There's something about the quiet of the mountains. It gives me a chance to think, away from the noise of the city." She nodded, feeling an unexpected kinship with him. She understood that need to escape, to find peace in a world constantly pushing for more. For the first time since her breakup with Mark, she felt a sense of calm in someone's presence, a reminder that there were people who saw life beyond ambition and deals. Their connection deepened with each passing day, and she couldn't deny the growing attraction she felt. Jason had a presence that was both intimidating and magnetic. He was different from Mark in so many ways. Where Mark had been self-centered and manipulative, Jason was direct, honest, and unapologetically himself. He didn't hide behind charm or flattery. He simply was. One evening, as they wrapped up a meeting at a trendy downtown bar, the air between them shifted. Their usual banter had taken on a more personal tone, and Sarah could feel the tension crackling like static electricity. She wasn't sure if it was the low lighting or the closeness of their seats, but something had changed. They fell into a comfortable silence, both nursing their drinks. She could feel his gaze on her, and when she looked up, his eyes held an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. "You know," he began, his voice low, "when I first met you, I thought you were just another corporate executive. But you've surprised me." She raised an eyebrow, feigning nonchalance, despite the quickening beat of her heart. "Is that so?" "Yes," he replied, leaning in slightly. "You're more than I expected. Smart, resilient, and incredibly determined." His words lingered in the air, filled with a meaning that went beyond professional admiration. She felt a warmth rise to her cheeks, her usual composure wavering under his intense gaze. "Thank you, Jason," she murmured, her voice soft. "You're not what I expected either." They held each other's gaze, an unspoken understanding passing between them. She knew that crossing this line would complicate things, that opening herself up to him could lead to unexpected consequences. But as she looked into his eyes, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: trust. Over the following weeks, their relationship took on a new dimension. They continued to meet for business, but there was an unspoken awareness between them, a connection that grew stronger with each encounter. Their professional rivalry remained, yet it was softened by mutual respect and an undeniable chemistry. One evening, after a particularly challenging day, Jason invited her to a quiet dinner at a small, out-of-the-way restaurant he frequented. Over candlelight and quiet music, they spoke about life, dreams, and everything in between. Jason listened intently, offering insights that resonated deeply with her. For the first time, Sarah found herself opening up, sharing her hopes, her fears, and even the pain of her past with Mark and Emily. Jason listened, his expression softening as she spoke. He didn't offer empty reassurances or cliches. Instead, he simply let her be herself, giving her the space to share without judgment. In that moment, she realized how much she'd changed. She wasn't the same Sarah who had once built her life around someone else's ambitions. She was stronger, more self-assured, and ready to build a future that was truly her own. As the evening drew to a close, Jason walked her to her car. They lingered, neither wanting to break the spell that had settled over them. He looked down at her, his gaze intense yet tender, and she felt a surge of emotion she hadn't expected. "Sarah," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know we started as rivals, but somewhere along the way I found myself wanting more." She looked up at him, her heart pounding as his words sank in. Slowly, she reached out, taking his hand in hers. "So did I," she replied softly, a small smile playing at her lips. For the first time in what felt like forever, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. This was a new beginning, a chance to build something real, not built on ambition or appearances, but on genuine connection. In the weeks that followed, Sarah and Jason's connection grew deeper, evolving from tentative allies into something profound and unbreakable. Their business meetings continued, but now they were punctuated by shared glances, laughter, and a warmth that lingered long after they parted ways. Each encounter felt like a continuation of an unspoken promise, a hint of something extraordinary that neither of them wanted to rush. Jason became Sarah's confidant, someone who understood her in a way few others ever had. He wasn't just a competitor. He was a partner who challenged her, pushed her to grow, and celebrated her victories. She felt safe with him, free to express her fears and dreams without judgment. One evening, after a long day of work, they found themselves taking a walk by the river. The city lights reflected on the water, casting a serene glow over their quiet conversation. Jason listened as Sarah shared her ambitions for Matthew's enterprises and the responsibilities she now carried on her shoulders. He offered words of encouragement, his admiration evident in his every response. "You have no idea how much you inspire me, Sarah," he said, his voice sincere. "Watching you handle everything with such strength and grace, it makes me want to be a better person." Her heart swelled at his words, a warmth spreading through her chest. She had spent so long hiding her vulnerability, shielding herself from the pain of her past. But with Jason, she didn't feel the need to protect herself. She felt seen, valued for who she was, not for what she could offer him or for any family connections she held. As they continued their walk, Sarah felt her hand brush against his. She glanced at him, catching the faintest hint of a smile on his lips. Tentatively, she reached out, intertwining her fingers with his. His hand was warm, steady, grounding her in the present and filling her with a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. In that simple gesture, she knew. This was more than just a business relationship, more than a fleeting attraction. This was the beginning of something real. Sarah's days became a blend of intense work and quiet moments with Jason. Their relationship was still new, still fragile, but it held a sense of promise and strength that neither had experienced before. Jason understood her struggles, her desire to prove herself not just in the shadow of her father but as her own person. One day, after a particularly grueling meeting with a challenging client, Sarah returned to her office feeling drained and overwhelmed. She was struggling to manage the demands of her position, the expectations placed on her, and the need to balance it all with her personal growth. Just as she sank into her chair, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Jason. "Meet me downstairs in 5?" Curious and grateful for the distraction, Sarah made her way to the lobby, where Jason was waiting with a small smile and a coffee in hand. "Thought you could use a pick-me-up," he said, handing her the cup. They walked to a nearby park where he listened as she vented about her day, nodding thoughtfully. He didn't offer solutions or try to fix her problems. He simply listened, giving her space to let out the frustration that had been building. "You know," he said after a pause, "you're stronger than you think. You're handling more than most people ever could. It's okay to feel overwhelmed. It just means you care enough to want to make a difference." His words washed over her, soothing her frayed nerves. She realized how rare it was to have someone who didn't demand anything from her, who simply stood by her side, offering quiet support. In Jason, she found the strength she needed to keep pushing forward, to believe in herself even when the path seemed daunting. Their relationship continued to deepen, marked by small, intimate moments that felt more real than any grand gesture. They spent quiet evenings cooking dinner together, sharing stories of their childhoods, and laughing over burnt attempts at new recipes. They ventured out on weekend hikes, discovering hidden trails and breathtaking views, creating memories that filled the empty spaces left by past heartbreaks. One evening, as they sat on a quiet hill overlooking the city skyline, Jason surprised her with a question that went deeper than anything they'd discussed before. "Do you ever regret leaving your old life behind?" he asked, his gaze thoughtful as he looked at her. Sarah paused, considering his question. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I miss the simplicity of it. The way things felt certain, like I knew where my life was headed. But now, I don't think I'd trade any of it. I'm stronger now. I know what I want and, more importantly, what I don't want." He nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. "It's funny. I spent so much of my life focused on success, on making a name for myself. But meeting you has reminded me of what's really important." She looked at him, feeling the depth of his words resonate within her. She reached out, resting her hand on his. In that moment, she understood that they were both searching for the same thing, a life built on purpose, honesty, and connection. They were partners, both in life and in love, and together they were stronger than they'd ever been alone. As the partnership between Matthews Enterprises and Kingston Dynamics took shape, Sarah and Jason found themselves juggling the fine line between their professional lives and their personal connection. They worked together seamlessly, blending their visions to create something innovative and impactful. Their companies thrived under their leadership, and soon the business world began to take notice of their collaboration. Yet even as they moved forward as allies, their rivalry remained. They challenged each other in ways that brought out the best in both, pushing each other to reach new heights. When they were in a business meeting, there was no trace of their personal relationship. They were both fierce, competitive, and unyielding. But the moment the workday ended, the tension would melt away, replaced by laughter, quiet conversations, and shared dreams. They celebrated each other's victories, supported each other through challenges, and created a partnership built on respect and admiration. One evening, after a particularly intense negotiation with a client, Jason looked over at her, his eyes sparkling with pride. "You were incredible in there," he said, a note of admiration in his voice. "I don't think anyone could have handled it better." Sarah smiled, her heart swelling at his praise. "Thank you. I couldn't have done it without you." He took her hand, his gaze softening. "Sarah, you could conquer the world on your own, but I'm glad I get to be a part of it with you." As the months passed, Sarah and Jason's relationship deepened into something neither of them could ignore. They were in love, though the words remained unspoken, lingering in every shared glance, every gentle touch, every quiet moment. One evening, as they sat on the patio of Jason's apartment, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, he finally spoke the words that had been hovering between them for so long. "Sarah," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion, "I know we didn't plan for this. I never expected to find someone like you. Someone who makes me feel whole. But I love you." Her heart raced, a warmth spreading through her chest as she looked into his eyes. She had waited for this moment, yet she hadn't realized just how much it would mean to hear those words from him. "I love you too, Jason," she replied softly, a smile spreading across her face. "You've changed my life in ways I never thought possible." They held each other, the weight of their love settling over them like a comforting blanket. In each other they'd found a home, a place where they could be vulnerable, strong, and unapologetically themselves. They were no longer defined by their pasts, their rivalries, or the expectations of others. They were simply Sarah and Jason, two people who had found something rare and beautiful in each other's arms. As they watched the stars above, they knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together, partners in every sense of the word. As Sarah and Jason continued to build both their relationship and partnership, life felt almost perfect. They were blending their professional lives seamlessly, while privately, they found deep happiness in each other's company. But just as Sarah began to settle into this new chapter, Mark reappeared, disrupting the calm she'd worked so hard to build. The news of Matthew's Enterprise's recent success hadn't gone unnoticed by Mark, who had been keeping a close eye on his former fiancée from a distance. Despite Sarah's firm rejection, he still harbored an idea that he could somehow win her back, or at least salvage some of the connections he'd once enjoyed with her family. His career had begun to stagnate, and he desperately needed the kind of alliances her family could provide. One evening, as Sarah left the Matthews Enterprises building, she spotted Mark leaning casually against a nearby car. She hesitated, an immediate wave of annoyance and discomfort flooding her senses. It had been months since she'd seen him, and she felt no nostalgia, only a quiet, steady resentment for the way he'd hurt her. "Sarah," he called out, giving her a smile that she remembered all too well. The same smile that had once charmed her into overlooking his flaws. "I was hoping we could talk." She straightened, her hand clutching her bag tightly. "Mark, what are you doing here?" I wanted to see you," he said, sounding almost sincere. "I've been thinking about us, about everything that happened. I know I made mistakes, and I don't expect you to forgive me. But I've changed, Sarah. I want to make things right." She crossed her arms, her expression unimpressed. "Mark, I don't think there's anything you can say that will change what happened. You made your choices and I've moved on." He took a step closer, his gaze intent. "But we were good together once, weren't we? We had plans, dreams. I know I messed up, but I can be better. I want to be better. Just give me another chance." A surge of anger welled up within her. How dare he try to rewrite history, to reduce their past to something so easily dismissed? Mark, you didn't just mess up. You betrayed me with my best friend. There's no going back from that. And frankly, I don't want to. Her words hit him like a slap, but he persisted. Sarah, don't you miss what we had? I know you've started seeing Jason, but I could give you everything you need. The future we always talked about. Don't you remember? She shook her head, a small, sad smile tugging at her lips. Mark, I remember the future we talked about. But I also remember the lies, the manipulation, and the way you made me feel like I was never enough. I don't want that anymore. I've found something better, someone better. Just then, Jason appeared at the entrance, having noticed the exchange from inside the building. He approached quietly, placing a reassuring hand on Sarah's shoulder as he stood by her side. The sight of Jason's protective presence sent a clear message to Mark, who seemed to deflate, his confidence crumbling. Jason looked at Mark with an expression that was both calm and commanding. Is there something you need, Mark? Mark's face twisted with a mixture of resentment and disbelief as he took in the scene. Here was the woman he'd once considered his, standing confidently beside a man who genuinely valued her, a man who could offer her the respect and support he never had. No, Mark said finally, his voice hollow. I thought maybe things could be different. Sarah stepped forward, her gaze unwavering as she addressed him one last time. Mark, I don't hold any bitterness anymore, but I'm done with the past. I have a future now, a future that doesn't include you. Defeated, Mark nodded, finally understanding that he'd lost her for good. Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving Sarah and Jason standing together under the quiet night sky. After Mark left, Sarah took a deep breath, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. She turned to Jason, who watched her with quiet admiration. Are you okay? He asked, his voice gentle. She nodded, smiling up at him with genuine relief. I am. More than okay. I think that was the closure I needed. They stood in silence for a moment, taking in the finality of what had just happened. Mark's chapter in her life had officially closed, and in its place, she felt a sense of peace and clarity she hadn't expected. Jason wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. You deserve someone who sees how incredible you are, Sarah. Someone who respects and values you every day. She looked up at him, her heart full as she realized how deeply she felt for him. Jason had shown her a kind of love that was free of games, free of manipulation, and full of respect. He had become her partner in every sense, a man who didn't need her to complete him, but valued her as she was. Thank you, Jason, she murmured, for everything, for showing me that love can be real and honest and good. They shared a quiet, tender kiss, sealing the beginning of a new chapter filled with hope and mutual respect. For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt free. Free to love, free to grow, and free to build a future that was truly her own. In the days that followed, Sarah and Jason continued to build their lives together, both personally and professionally. Their companies thrived, their relationship blossomed, and they made plans for the future with an excitement neither had ever felt before. They supported each other's dreams, balancing ambition with genuine care and creating a partnership that was both strong and deeply fulfilling. Sarah often thought back on the journey that had brought her to this point, the pain of betrayal, the struggle for independence, and the discovery of her own strength. She knew she wouldn't be the person she was today without those experiences, but she was also grateful to leave them behind. With Jason by her side, she looked toward a future that was no longer clouded by the mistakes of the past. They had found something real, something true, and together they would face whatever challenges came their way. And as they walked hand in hand through the doors of their next big project, Sarah knew she had finally found the happiness and peace she'd been searching for all along. Epilogue. Sarah and Jason's wedding day. The sky was painted in soft shades of pink and lavender as the sun began its descent over the rolling hills. A light breeze drifted through the vineyards, carrying with it the faint scent of blooming jasmine and freshly turned earth. Under a white canopy adorned with delicate flowers, family and friends gathered in quiet anticipation, their faces alight with joy. In a suite overlooking the venue, Sarah stood in front of a large mirror, her heart fluttering with excitement. She wore a dress of flowing ivory lace, its delicate fabric hugging her in all the right places and cascading down into a gentle train. The simple elegance of the dress suited her perfectly, a blend of grace and strength. She looked at herself, a woman who had endured heartache and had emerged more confident, more self-assured than ever. Her mother adjusted a few loose tendrils of hair and then took Sarah's hands, her eyes glistening with pride. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," she whispered. "Jason is a lucky man." Sarah smiled, squeezing her mother's hands. "Thank you, Mom. I'm the lucky one." She took a deep breath, steadying herself. This wasn't just another step in life. It was a new beginning. She thought of Jason, waiting for her at the altar, the man who had changed her life in ways she hadn't thought possible. He'd shown her love that was pure and genuine, built on trust, mutual respect, and the joy of shared dreams. When the time came, she walked down the aisle with her father by her side, her heart pounding with each step. She caught sight of Jason at the altar, looking impossibly handsome in a classic black suit, his eyes fixed on her with a mixture of admiration and tenderness. As she neared him, his gaze never wavered, his love for her shining through with a warmth that melted away every last trace of her nerves. They exchanged vows under the open sky, their words filled with promises of loyalty, laughter, and support. Jason spoke of her strength, her resilience, and the way she'd taught him the true meaning of partnership. Sarah, her voice trembling with emotion, promised to stand by him through all the twists and turns of life, to encourage his dreams as he'd encouraged hers, and to cherish every day together. As they placed rings on each other's fingers, sealing their promises, a cheer rose up from the crowd, and the couple shared a kiss that was met with applause and laughter. Their friends and family clapped, tears of joy and pride in their eyes, as they watched two souls who had found their way to each other against all odds. The evening slipped into a warm, joyful reception, filled with music, dancing, and heartfelt toasts. Jason's best friend gave a humorous speech, recounting Jason's fierce ambition and surprise at meeting someone who could match him in every way. Sarah's father shared a few touching words about his daughter's strength, expressing his pride and happiness in the life she was building. Later, as they shared their first dance, Jason held Sarah close, swaying gently as the soft notes of their song filled the night air. He whispered in her ear, "You've made me the happiest man alive, Sarah." She looked up at him, her eyes shining. "And you've shown me what love really is." They moved together, completely in sync, as if the world around them had faded away, leaving just the two of them wrapped in each other's arms. In that moment, they knew that whatever life brought, they would face it side by side, bound by a love that was deep, true, and unwavering. As the stars began to twinkle above, Sarah and Jason looked toward a future filled with love, laughter, and endless possibilities. And as they walked hand in hand into the next chapter of their lives, they both knew they'd finally found their forever. If you enjoyed this video and want more heartwarming stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. May the love inside your heart blossom.